Wabarakatuh. My name is Ayus. I'm a student of English Education Study Program in English Department, Faculty of Languages and Literature, Universitas Negeri Makassar. I would like to present my draft proposal entitled The Implementation of Reflective Teaching Through Student Feedback in Teaching English at MTs YMPI Rappang. But first of all, I want to say thank you to my advisors and my examiners. Table of Contents. This research consists of Chapter 1 Introduction, Chapter 2 Literature Review, Chapter 3 Research Method. Now we move to Chapter 1 Introduction. The first is the background of the research. Reflective teaching has been known by so many researchers as a tool to enhance teacher professional development. There are 7 strategies of reflective teaching. There are reflective teaching theory, collaborative learning, recording lesson, teachers-educator feedback, peer observation, student feedback, and action research. On this research, the researcher will focusing on student feedback. Seldin 1997 stated that despite the clear value of using many sources of information, in many cases, student feedback is the most important source on teaching effectiveness. 3 previous studies about reflective teaching through student feedback conducted by Matthew 2017, Iqbal et al. 2016, and Meza 2018 shows that the first, student feedback is an important tool for the teacher to reflect. The second is there is a significant improvement when teacher reflect. And the last is teacher can recognize and correct their mistakes through student feedback. Despite so much research about reflective teaching and student feedback, there is no specific research about how to implement reflective teaching through student feedback in a class. And there is also no specific course in university about reflective teaching and the importance of it. The next is problem of the research. The problem of this research are: how does English teacher at MTs YMPI Rappang implement reflective teaching through student feedback? The second is, what are the obstacles that teacher face on doing reflective teaching through student feedback? The next is objective of the research. This research is directed to find out how English teacher at MTs YMPI Rappang implement reflective teaching through student feedback. The second is to find out the obstacle that teacher at MTs YMPI Rappang face in doing reflective teaching through student feedback. The next is significance of the research. This research is expected to give a significance to the research field. The first is theoretical significance. The expected result of this research is to give contribution to the study of English teaching in Indonesia and worldwide. Moreover, the finding of this research is expected to become a useful reference to the literature of classroom research, especially reflective teaching through student feedback. The second is practical significance. For the other researcher, the result of this research is expected to contribute useful information for the future classroom research dealing with reflective teaching through student feedback in teaching English. For the reader, the result of this research is expected to enrich the knowledge of the reader, especially in reflective teaching through student feedback in teaching English. Now we move to the Chapter 2, Literature Review. The first is pertinent idea. Reflective teaching. Reflective teaching is the process of rethink and analyze about what goes on in a classroom in order to improve teacher classroom practice. Reflective teaching is the process where teachers reflect on their action while teaching in a classroom, to analyzing and collecting descriptive data that will be using to show the needs of improvement. Reflective teaching is for the teacher who tends to think about their action in a classroom and willing to make them into action. According to Iqbal et al. 2016, reflective teaching is give critical attention towards professional value to figure out the theories working behind their today action. The second is student feedback. Student feedback is one of the reflective teaching strategies. The function of student feedback is to gather information about what goes on in a classroom. It can be done with a simple questionnaire. Iqbal 2016 in his research concluded that student feedback gives multitude gauge to the teacher to measure their teaching effectiveness. The study also described that feedback as an initial tool of reflection for teachers. The next is conceptual framework. This is the conceptual framework of the research. Now we move to the chapter 3, research method. The first is research design. This research will use descriptive qualitative research method. According to Crosswell 2012, the main purpose of qualitative research is to investigate the social phenomenon in detail so it can provide detailed information. The key instrument of this research is the researcher herself. But the researcher will use interview and observation as supported instruments. This research will use Mills and Huberman technique data analysis to analyze the data. The next is time and setting of the research. The research will carried out at MTs YMPI Rappang in academic year 2022 and 2023. The subject of the research. The research participant is an English teacher of MTs YMPI Rappang. The researcher will use purposive sampling to pick the subject of the research, because the subject of the research must be the English teacher that implement reflective teaching through student feedback. The next is variable and operational definition. The first is reflective teaching is the teachers will think of what they are doing in the classroom to analyze what's to improve. The second is student feedback. Student feedback is the simple question given by the teacher to the student that will be using as material to practice reflective teaching. The third is teacher obstacle. Teacher's obstacle in this research is the obstacle that English teachers face in implemented reflective teaching through student feedback. The next is research instrument. The research instrument in this research are interview and observations. The next is procedure of collecting data. The first is interview. Interview will be conducted twice. The researcher will encounter the first interview to 3 teachers to find out which teacher implement reflective teaching through student feedback. And the second interview is to figure out how English teacher implement reflective teaching through student feedback. The interview will be performed in Bahasa Indonesia to avoid misunderstanding. The second is observation. The researcher will observe the class in order to know how teacher implement reflective teaching through student feedback. The researcher will observe and take notes to the important information about reflective teaching through student feedback. The observation will conduct in 1 month. The last is technique of data analysis. The technique of data analysis that we'll use is Mills and Huberman data analysis. The step of Mills and Huberman data analysis are: the first is data display, the second is data reduction, and the last is conclusions. I think that's all. Thank you for your kind attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.